Welcome back. Over 850 New York City public schools reopened over the past few weeks with the requirement of weekly random testing for staff and students. About 250 of these schools are participating in 5-day-a-week in-person learning throughout the city, with the mayor planning to systematically shift more schools to in-person learning each week. Joining us now to talk about the reopening of public schools is ESL teacher Aixa Rodriguez from Caucus and public school parent Michael Beltzer. Thank you so much for being here with us, guys. Aixa, I want to start off with you. Can you tell us a little bit about Caucus?
So MORE is the movement of rank and file educators. We are a caucus, kind of like a political party that organizes around social justice issues within the UFT, which is to say that we are seeing our learning, the working conditions as the learning conditions of the students. So we understand that there is an intersectionality between social justice issues and how it plays out in the public education system.
And Michael, can you tell me a little bit about your experience as a public school parent?
Yeah, so my experience as a public school parent of a 10-year-old daughter has been one that has been one of uncertainty. As a working parent, it's been hard to juggle her new remote learning requirements. And, there's been a lot of, there hasn't been a lot of communication or a plan that parents have been able to follow. So it's something that's been difficult for me and others in my community.
And moving to Aixa, can you tell us about some of the health precautions set up within schools?
Well, different schools have different precautions depending on the age of the building. First off, there are many teachers who are on medical accommodation. So that's one thing that has impacted the schools. The staffing is not the same. So with that staffing comes the whole issue of how many students can be assigned to an in-person teacher, and we're following the CDC guidelines and capping it at a certain time. My understanding is that currently the DOE is trying to up that limit and add a couple of more kids up to like 14 in a class. And so those of you who went to public schools, if you went to a school that was built before the Great Depression, the sizes, the shapes, the materials, the heating, the ventilation, the windows, all those things are problematic. If you are in a more modern school, you may have the opposite problem where the windows don't open because everything is the HVAC system, which in the Martin Luther King building was a disaster. The whole building had to be shut down and 6 schools had to be relocated. So it depends, but our facilities are a big part of why we want people to pay attention to what we're saying about the conditions of the buildings. Some of these buildings are just literally death traps.
And Michael, what have some of your observations been of the health precautions within schools?
I personally have not been entering public school buildings, so I couldn't tell you directly. I do serve, my community on the Community Education Council. So we have heard a lot of feedback that, people feel like it's moving in the right direction, but there are still some concerns about whether the tests are mandatory and whether the vaccine will be mandatory as well.
And, speaking of the vaccine, how do you think Aixa, for you, are you, optimistic that a vaccine will improve the situation within schools?
I am, and I will take it. I'm very happy that it's finally happening with multiple different companies who have created different vaccines. So we're not dependent on one only, and that we can continue to have, move towards a new normal. Because the reality is that teachers are an essential workforce. We know this, we're not in denial of it, but the situation is we need to be safe. And we have a lot of older teachers, a lot of us have health conditions, and it's a female dominated profession. So you have a situation where a lot of us are mothers, or we are pregnant, or some other circumstances. So the vaccine is super important to get us in front of children. I believe that teachers and educators are 1B or something in the ranking of who's going to get it first, healthcare workers, nursing homes, and that we'll be part of the first few waves. professionals that will get access to the vaccine. And I hope that it becomes mandatory, just like every other vaccine. Because I'm an ESL teacher. I work with kids who are in a lot of vulnerable communities who come from all over the world. And the reality is we got to keep each other safe. A lot of these communities suffered very greatly under COVID. Without precautions and without that support, you can have more pockets and outbreaks in communities that have high levels of poverty and not a lot of access to healthcare, and can really have some adverse effects on their population. So I can't wait for this to happen. Because there will be a measure of protection that otherwise we won't have. Opening the window for ventilation is not protection. And that's what we're currently doing in these buildings built in the 1930s. So a vaccine, I can't wait for it.
And Michael, with your child, is a mandatory vaccine, is that something that you would be open to?
Well, I believe that my child will get it. I will be getting it. I believe most people are on board with mandatory vaccination. I think the important part to get to is to the 75% threshold. I think they said that's what they need the vaccine to go on. So we really need to make sure that schools are serving as a model for the community. So if we're pushing for vaccinations, we should make sure that the communications are clear to folks, that folks know exactly where they can go to get it. Maybe some schools could serve as hubs for this type of administration. We need to make sure that everything is going out in all the language in each of the community. Schools, again, could take a leadership there because they have whole dedicated arms to reach out to the parents in the community. And we need to also make sure that it's equitable. I'm glad to hear that teachers are high up in the list because they are essential workers. They're putting their lives on the line. But we know when it comes to getting resources for our community, our Black and Brown communities, is not always equitable. So I think when we move to make it mandatory, we need to make sure that going alongside that is making sure that it's equitable in its distribution and it's not overlooking people who are already at high risk for COVID in general.
Now, Mayor de Blasio is really pushing for in-person learning 5 days a week. And Aixa, just a few days ago, Caucus recently tweeted that 127 of the 878 schools that reopened are now closing down due to COVID cases. Do you think that this is going to be a viable plan to have schools move back to this 5 day a week in-person learning?
Everybody has goals. I respect that de Blasio is trying, but let's be real. None of the problems were solved. So pushing towards 5 is ridiculous. And from the parent allies that we have, what we've been told is this push for 5 days is ignoring the majority of students, 700K plus, who are remote. And it's pushing for more active days of blended learning or hybrid learning for the kids who are there, the majority of which right now come from populations that are privileged, the majority, or people who have no real choice. But there's the vast majority of all students are being kept home at remote. And why? Because it was less disorganized. The kids got more attention 5 days a week, had consistency, and in some cases were ahead in the curriculum than the kids who had 2 days a week in person, 3 days remote, and got juggled between different classes and teachers all over the place. It's been absolute chaos. So I can understand why he's going towards 5 days a week, because hybrid has been an absolute fail. But because we're seeing an exponential growth of COVID cases coming post-Thanksgiving and going from 5 a few days ago all the way to 127 yesterday, I think it's not logical. It doesn't follow basic math. It doesn't follow the science. And we have been saying forever, keep us remote till January, fix all the problems. There's over 60,000 students who still have not received the proper tech. And there've been lots of glitches reported with the iPads that many parents are dissatisfied with, and all of these other things that are making parents' life very difficult. So it's one thing to want and to have a goal and aspire to something. It's quite another to be like, let's solve the problem so that we can do this. It seems like he wants to build a plane while flying it. And it's not a wise situation. We're going to to have Christmas coming up soon. You can't tell people not to travel. There were several of my students whose parents couldn't find like any place to watch them, sent them to their grandparents in DR. So they were staying over there. And so they technically were logging on from another country to go to school. So the reality is childcare has been an issue. So I respect that. Childcare definitely has been an issue. Learning Bridges has been a godsend for some, and people who didn't get access were kind of frustrated with it. 5 days a week is ambitious, and I understand that. But can we solve the problems first? Can we make sure that the kids have tech? Can we make sure that the teachers are trained? And can we really have a conversation about what we're trying to get out of the kids in a remote setting with a short amount of time? Because the kids are being bombarded with a lot of work because the teachers are being pressured to be rigorous, and then everybody's unhappy. So he needs to solve his problems first instead of creating more.
And Michael, as a parent, have you experienced difficulties with remote learning as far as, technical issues, and has your school addressed this?
Fortunately, my daughter has access to a device. I know a lot of other kids have not. The school has been able to adjust it as much as the Department of Education has allowed, getting the hands on the devices. What I've seen is, what Aixa was talking about was the juggling of the staff. My daughter, it was just a traumatizing experience to go through, hearing her teacher say, "This is the last day I'm going to be able to teach you today," and hearing all the kids cry on the call because they had connected with this teacher, because they were shifting things around to do in-person learning. And it was just a last minute change. So I think that's been a challenge is, the consistency and again, throughout the process. And but in some ways there has been some good things coming out of remote learning. I really appreciate both our teachers have done social emotional learning, which is something that needs to make its way back into the classroom if they do full-time learning, and I think there's some lessons that we can be learning from things like that, in the way that they're able to structure some of the time with the remote learning that can help in-person learning when it returns.
Thank you guys so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. That is all for our show today. Thank you for tuning in to BXRX. I'm your host, Jericho Tran, wishing you a safe and happy holiday season.